February 1944. Black dust rises in the Pacific wind. The island smells of sulfur and salt, the ghost of an ancient volcano. Beneath a merciless sun, American engineers in torn khaki drive bulldozers across jagged rock, their faces hidden behind goggles and grime. Every strike of the pickaxe sends sparks from obsidian stone. Around them, the Pacific stretches endless, blue, beautiful, and utterly empty. Above, the thunder of engines rolls across the sky as B-29s pass overhead, limping back from Japan, smoke trailing from their wings. Some won't make it home. A young Seabee wipes his forehead and looks at the ground, a lifeless crater of lava and ash. Soon, he's told, this will be a runway, a landing strip carved inside the heart of a volcano. He doesn't yet know that this impossible project, the airfield on Iwo Jima, will change the fate of thousands of airmen and turn a forgotten rock into one of World War II's most vital battlegrounds. The story begins with the question, why build an airfield in hell itself? By early 1944, the Pacific War had become a battle of distance. The United States had clawed its way across the ocean, island by island, from the blood-soaked beaches of Tarawa to the coral atolls of the Marshalls. Each victory brought American bombers a few hundred miles closer to Japan. But close was not close enough. The B-29 Superfortress, America's newest and most ambitious bomber, could fly farther than anything before it, nearly 3,000 miles. But from its bases in the Mariana Islands, the round trip to Japan pushed even that range to its limits. Engines overheated, crews fought exhaustion, planes ran out of fuel and ditched in the sea before ever reaching home. The Air War's math was brutal. For every long-range raid, dozens of men were lost not to enemy fire, but to the Pacific itself. The answer, planners believed, lay in a single volcanic island halfway between Saipan and Tokyo, Iwo Jima. It was small, barely 8 square miles, but its position was perfect. A forward airfield there would serve 3 vital purposes. As a fighter escort base for P-51 Mustangs protecting the B-29s too, as an emergency landing site for crippled bombers returning from Japan, 2-3, as a launching platform for shorter, more accurate strikes on the Japanese homeland. The idea seemed brilliant, on paper. But Iwo Jima was no tropical paradise. It was the tip of an extinct volcano, a wasteland of black ash and razor-sharp rock. Beneath the surface, the earth was so hot it could melt tar. Rain pooled in the craters, then vanished in minutes through porous lava. Nothing grew there. When American engineers first surveyed it from the air, one officer remarked, "You couldn't drive a stake into that ground without hitting hell." But the Seabees, the U.S. Navy's construction battalions, were trained for the impossible. They had built ports from coral, roads through jungles and runways on swamps. Now they would try something even bolder, to carve a functional airfield inside a volcano, under fire, on terrain that defied engineering logic. They brought with them bulldozers, graders, dynamite, and steel matting, the skeleton of an airstrip. But there were limits to even their ingenuity. Volcanic ash had the consistency of flour. It swallowed wheels and clogged engines. Heavy machinery broke down faster than it could be repaired. The men worked day and night, sometimes 20 hours straight, using crushed lava rock mixed with coral and cement to form the first stable base layers. Each load was precious. Every ton of gravel had to be shipped from distant islands. While the U.S. mobilized its engineers, Japan watched from afar. The Imperial General Staff knew the island's value too. They began fortifying Iwo Jima in mid-1943, 11 miles of tunnels, concrete bunkers, and camouflaged artillery, all designed to repel the inevitable American invasion. As American engineers planned how to build the airfield, the Japanese were already building their fortress. Two forces, each digging into the same island for entirely different purposes. One to launch planes, the other to destroy them. The fate of both would soon meet on this black volcanic rock in the middle of nowhere. By late 1944, the Pacific map was tightening around Japan like a vice. The U.S. Navy's fast carrier groups dominated the seas, while the Army Air Forces prepared to launch Operation Detachment, the assault on Iwo Jima. The goal was clear: seize the island, neutralize its radar warning stations, and finish construction of the airfields that would bring Japan within range of sustained bombing. But before the invasion, those airfields already existed. 3 in total, labeled Airfields Number 1, Number 2, and Number 3 by Japanese engineers. Dug straight into the volcanic rock and built with slave labor, they were primitive, yet functional. American reconnaissance flights photographed them repeatedly throughout 1944, noting their expansion and the number of aircraft parked on them. What the Americans saw was both a challenge and an opportunity. The Japanese had already done some of the groundwork, literally. Their runways could be captured, repaired, and expanded to meet American needs. But that meant fighting for them first. For the Japanese, Iwo Jima was not merely another outpost. It was the front door to the home islands. From its radar stations atop Mount Suribachi, they could detect incoming B-29 formations from as far as 700 miles away, giving Tokyo hours to prepare defenses. The garrison, some 21,000 men under Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, was ordered to fight to the last man. Kuribayashi, a veteran diplomat and strategist, understood American firepower. He knew he couldn't win, but he could delay. His plan: let the enemy land, then destroy them from underground. He built a labyrinth beneath the surface, 11 miles of tunnels connecting bunkers, artillery caves, and command posts, all invisible from above. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Admiral Nimitz and General Hap Arnold faced their own pressures. The B-29 campaign over Japan, launched from the Marianas in late 1944, was struggling. High-altitude jet stream winds blew bombs miles off target. Mechanical failures and fuel shortages forced crews to ditch into the sea. Hundreds of men were dying without ever seeing Japan. Arnold's staff concluded, if we had Iwo Jima, we could save them. A safe runway only 750 miles from Tokyo would mean emergency landings instead of ocean burials. And from that same field, Mustang fighters could finally escort the B-29s all the way to their targets. But Iwo Jima was more than an airfield. It was a symbolic gateway. Japan's military command believed that losing it would signal to the nation that the Americans could now touch their homeland at will. So they poured reinforcements, supplies, and artillery into the island, fortifying every cave and crater. As American planners drew up the invasion schedule, secrecy was paramount. The details of construction equipment, CB deployments, and engineering plans were withheld even from some of the combat units. Intelligence warned that Japanese radio intercepts were active across the Pacific, and any hint of an airfield project might reveal U.S. intentions. To protect the mission, American reconnaissance intensified. P-38 photoplanes flew at extreme risk, diving low over the island to capture oblique images of trenches, gun pits, and runways. Analysts at Pearl Harbor studied each print, mapping the enemy's defenses, and imagining even then where new runways could be laid once victory was secured. The Japanese, meanwhile, had little intelligence of their own. From their perspective, the island's volcanic terrain made a large-scale invasion seem improbable. They misjudged the scale of American logistics, the sheer ability to move 450 ships and 110,000 men across the ocean to seize a speck of land. By February 1945, the stage was set. The Seabees waited offshore with bulldozers and dynamite, ready to roll the moment the beaches were secure. Pilots of the 20th Air Force prayed for a safe haven that did not yet exist. And beneath the surface, Kuribayashi's men waited in silence, unseen, unheard, ready. The construction of an airfield inside a volcano would soon become one of the most extraordinary feats of engineering in wartime history, and one of its bloodiest. The black rock of Iwo Jima was about to witness both creation and destruction on a scale no engineer had ever planned for. When the Marines stormed Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, they weren't alone. Among the riflemen and tank crews came another kind of soldier, one who carried shovels, dynamite, and bulldozers instead of rifles. They were the Seabees, the U.S. Navy's construction battalions, engineers trained to build under fire. Within hours of the first landings, the black volcanic ash swallowed their vehicles. Bulldozers sank to their frames. Graders spun helplessly. The island was not sand, but powdered rock, soft as dust, heavy as iron. Men called it sugar sand from hell. The Seabees' job was unrelenting. Build an operational airfield while the battle still raged around them. Mortar shells fell. Snipers fired from invisible holes. Japanese artillery zeroed in on the sound of engines. Still, the work continued. Bulldozer operators wore flak vests and helmets, carving runways through smoke and fire. Many of the engineers had no combat training. They were welders, surveyors, and mechanics who suddenly found themselves fighting and building at the same time. You could hear the machine guns popping, one recalled, and you just keep shoveling. On D+3, 3 days after the landings, a small Seabee team began filling shell holes and leveling terrain on what had been Motoyama Airfield No. 1. They worked alongside Marines, still flushing out bunkers only a few hundred yards away. Trucks hauled crushed lava and coral, mixed with steel matting to create the first usable surface. By D+8, the first American fighter plane, a damaged P-51 Mustang, landed on that rough strip. The moment was brief, almost surreal. Around it, the battle still roared. But for the first time, the volcanic island had served its intended purpose. The men cheered, then went straight back to work. For the Seabees, the volcano was not just an enemy position. It was a living, breathing obstacle. The ground shifted with heat. Steam vented from cracks. Bulldozer treads melted. Some nights, when the wind died, the smell of sulfur mixed with the stench of cordite and death. Yet they kept going. They had been told their work could save thousands of bomber crews. And that was enough. From a technical standpoint, constructing a runway on volcanic rock was an engineering nightmare. The fine ash offered no load-bearing capacity. Heavy aircraft would simply sink into it like mud. The solution came through improvisation and sheer determination. Engineers experimented with layered compaction, first crushing the volcanic gravel with rollers, then mixing it with coral and cement flown in by cargo ships. Every foot of runway was pounded, graded, and reinforced by hand when machines failed. The standard runway design for the B-29 required nearly 8,500 feet of length and 500 feet of width. On Iwo Jima, there was barely room to fit it between ridges of hardened lava. The Seabees had to cut into the slopes of Motoyama Ridge itself, moving over 800,000 cubic yards of earth and stone, while still under enemy observation. The engineers also faced constant maintenance challenges. The island's porous surface absorbed rain instantly, creating uneven ground and dangerous soft spots. To solve this, they installed drainage ditches and laid Marsden matting, interlocking steel panels that distributed weight evenly under bomber tires. Power lines were laid underground to protect against bombardment. Fuel lines and storage tanks were built behind natural ridges. Even control towers were constructed from scavenged steel and concrete, improvised from destroyed Japanese structures. By March 1945, the Seabees had created not just a functioning airstrip, but a small city, complete with maintenance bays, supply depots, and radar stations, all carved into black volcanic rock. It was, in every sense, a technological miracle born from ruin. As one engineer later wrote, "We built a fortress on a furnace." The strategic value of the Iwo Jima airfields was immediate and immense. Once secured and expanded, the main runways, now renamed South Field, Central Field, and North Field, became lifelines for the B-29 campaign. From these strips, P-51 Mustang fighters could finally escort the bombers deep into Japanese airspace. No longer would B-29s fly alone against waves of interceptors. The Mustangs, launching from Iwo Jima, met them halfway and guided them home, slashing losses dramatically. The airfields also became critical for emergency landings. Between March and August 1945, over 2,400 B-29s made unscheduled landings on Iwo Jima. Planes riddled with flak, engines shot out, fuel tanks nearly empty. Each one represented 10 or more airmen who might otherwise have been lost at sea. To handle such operations, engineers designed a rotation system. One runway for takeoff, one for recovery, and one for maintenance. The control network had to manage both combat missions and distress flights simultaneously. A complex ballet of life and death. Every element of the airfield layout served dual purposes. Taxiways doubled as revetments to shield planes from incoming artillery. Hangars were half buried for protection. Observation posts were built into natural lava ridges for camouflage. What had begun as a desperate engineering challenge soon evolved into a tactical masterpiece. The Volcano base, as airmen called it, was not just a construction site. It was a turning point in the Pacific Air War. By the summer of 1945, Iwo Jima had become one of the busiest air hubs on Earth, its black runways shimmering under the Pacific sun, dotted with the silver wings of bombers and fighters bound for Japan. And yet, behind every takeoff and landing, lay the memory of the men who built it, under fire, in heat, in ash. Their creation was functional, strategic, and symbolic. A living runway carved from death. Behind the scenes of Iwo Jima's volcanic transformation stood the commanding minds who pushed the plan forward. Men like General Holland Smith, Admiral Chester Nimitz, and General Hap Arnold of the U.S. Army Air Forces. Each saw the island differently. For Nimitz, it was a stepping stone, a means to bring Japan's inner defense line within reach. For Arnold, it was an act of salvation, a sanctuary for his B-29 crews. And for Holland Smith, the Marine general charged with taking the island, it was a nightmare of necessity. Smith protested early intelligence estimates that predicted Iwo Jima could be taken in 5 days. He knew better. The Japanese had been preparing for over a year, turning every ridge and crater into a fortress. But Washington's strategic timeline left no room for delay. The B-29 campaign depended on it. When the assault began on February 19, 1945, the first week alone proved how underestimated the enemy was. The volcanic ash clogged weapons, immobilized tanks, and slowed reinforcements. As casualties mounted, nearly 7,000 Marines killed and over 20,000 wounded. Smith's men pressed forward, inch by inch. Through it all, the Seabees and Marine engineers operated under a dual command. Combat officers demanding speed, and Air Force officers demanding perfection. Every order carried weight measured not just in hours, but in lives. Nimitz later called Iwo Jima a place of uncommon valor. But within the staff rooms of the Pacific Fleet, it was also a case study in the cost of vision. The decision to capture and build on Iwo Jima was strategically sound. And yet, its price in blood was nearly unmatched in the Pacific campaign. Still, Arnold's vision held true. Within weeks of the battle's end, his B-29 crews were landing safely on that volcanic field, proof that the sacrifice had achieved its goal. In that sense, the leadership behind the operation had done what war leaders must often do: weigh the unthinkable and still give the order. For the Japanese, Iwo Jima was both shield and tomb. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the man responsible for its defense, knew he could not stop the American invasion, but he could delay it long enough to buy Japan time. Kuribayashi rejected the traditional strategy of beach defense. Instead, he turned the island itself into a fortress, directing his engineers to dig an underground city of bunkers, artillery chambers, and tunnel networks stretching over 11 miles. From within this labyrinth, his troops could survive bombardments that would have annihilated surface defenses. Yet, for all his brilliance, Kuribayashi's intelligence picture was incomplete. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft could not reach the Marianas or Hawaii. Radio intercepts told them little. He believed the Americans would use Iwo Jima primarily as a fighter base, not realizing the scale of the B-29 operation it would support. In one of his final letters to Tokyo, he wrote, "We will resist to the end, though our strength is but the sand beneath our feet." Kuribayashi's men fought to the last. When the island finally fell in March 1945, fewer than 200 Japanese soldiers were captured alive. The rest had died in place, many buried in the same tunnels they had built. Ironically, their own construction, the runways and reinforced positions of Motoyama, became the foundation for the Allied airfields that would follow. The same volcanic rock that had hidden Japanese guns would now cradle American bombers. In the end, the defenders had built both their fortress and their grave, a silence that still echoes beneath the black sands. The story of Iwo Jima's airfields is not just about courage and engineering. It's also about logistics, secrecy, and the moral weight of necessity. To build an airfield inside a volcano required an ocean of supplies. Over 500,000 tons of equipment, cement, and steel were shipped to the island. Every nail, every gallon of fuel, every blade for the bulldozers came across the Pacific under escort. Convoys ran around the clock, protected by destroyers and patrol craft. Seabees worked in 12-hour shifts, sleeping in foxholes beside their machines. There was no comfort, no escape from the smell of sulfur and the sound of gunfire. Yet, morale remained astonishingly high, sustained by the knowledge that every strip of steel laid could mean lives saved. After the island's capture, captured Japanese laborers and POWs were briefly used to clear debris and assist in minor reconstruction tasks, though most of the work remained in American hands. There were no civilians on Iwo Jima, only the living, the dying, and the dead. By mid-1945, the base supported over 21,000 personnel and more than 1,500 aircraft, operating as the logistical heart of the Pacific Air War. Hospitals, radar stations, fuel depots, and communication centers sprawled across what had once been bare rock. And in that transformation lay a moral paradox. The same ground that had cost tens of thousands of lives was now saving tens of thousands more. Each B-29 that touched down with burning engines or bleeding crews was a testament to that grim balance. The Volcano had become both a monument to destruction and a sanctuary of survival. The world would soon see its ultimate test when the skies above, Japan filled with the final waves of American bombers, launched from a volcanic airfield that had once seemed impossible. The conquest of Iwo Jima did not end with the flag atop Mount Suribachi. For the engineers, that moment, immortalized by the photograph, marked only the halfway point. Beneath the victory banners, the island itself still resisted, its very earth defying human intent. The task was simple in theory, impossible in practice: carve 3 operational airfields from a living volcano. The Seabees called it Operation Hot Rocks. From March through May 1945, their enemy was no longer Japanese gunfire. It was the island itself. Every foot of runway had to be cut, leveled, and paved through black, porous rock that shifted and buckled under pressure. Lava dust clogged engines, melted boot soles, and turned rainwater into thick sludge. The first priority was Motoyama No. 1, the southernmost strip closest to the landing beaches. The Japanese had partially built it before the invasion, but constant bombardment and shelling had left it cratered and unstable. Crews filled holes with crushed lava, laid down Marston matting, interlocking steel planks, and compacted it with rolling trucks until the surface hardened. It was like trying to tame fire with steel. On March 4, 1945, just 13 days after the initial landings and before the island was officially secured, a crippled B-29 named Dynamite made a desperate emergency landing. It came in low, engines sputtering, tires bursting, and skidded across the half-finished strip as Seabees dove for cover. When the aircraft stopped, its crew climbed out alive. The unfinished runway had just saved its first 10 men. That moment galvanized the engineers. They worked with renewed purpose, often under bombardment from remaining Japanese holdouts hidden in tunnels near the runways. Snipers harassed the crews by day. Artillery bursts echoed by night. Seabees began carrying rifles alongside shovels. Some units even welded armor plates to their bulldozers. By the end of March, Motoyama No. 1 was fully operational, a 5,000-foot runway capable of handling fighters and emergency B-29s. But the real challenge was still ahead. Motoyama No. 2, unlike the first strip, No. 2 lay across a natural ridge that cut through the center of the island. To make it level, engineers had to move over 800,000 cubic yards of volcanic rock by hand, bulldozer, and explosives. The work never stopped. In the day, the temperature soared to 120 Celsius, baking men and machinery alike. At night, sudden rainstorms turned the crushed cinder into black rivers that swallowed equipment whole. Even the Navy's largest machinery struggled. Diesel engines overheated. Bearings failed. Supply ships were delayed by typhoons. The volcanic dust wore down propellers and aircraft filters so fast that a new term entered the engineering logs: Iwo Grit damage. By April 7th, Admiral Nimitz visited the island. The air was thick with sulfur and smoke, the ground still trembling from underground detonations. Standing beside the Seabees bulldozers, he famously remarked, "The enemy has been crushed, but the earth itself fights on." That same week, tragedy nearly halted the project. A sudden underground explosion, likely a pocket of trapped gas ignited by machinery, tore through a section of the No. 2 runway, killing 11 engineers and injuring dozens more. The blast carved a crater 50 feet wide. The Navy considered suspending work until the cause was identified, but the crews refused. They filled the crater with lava rock and kept going. The engineers called it the island's last counterattack. By May 7, 1945, after more than 2 months of relentless effort, the main runway at Motoyama No. 2 opened. It stretched nearly 7,000 feet, long enough to handle the massive B-29 Superfortress bombers. A third field, Motoyama No. 3, was begun but never fully completed before the war ended. Still, the 2 operational fields transformed Iwo Jima from a battlefield into the most critical emergency base in the Pacific. In just 76 days, an island that had cost 26,000 casualties had been reborn as a sanctuary. Each airfield bore the scars of its making: black stone pitted with craters, heat shimmering off steel matting, the faint smell of burned fuel mixed with salt wind. The Seabees left plaques near the runways with a simple inscription: built by those who fought for every foot of it. But even as the final bulldozers roared to life and planes began circling overhead, no one yet knew how vital these airfields would become, or how many lives they would save in the final, terrible months of the Pacific War. By June 1945, the transformation was complete. What had once been a blasted volcanic fortress was now an island of runways, hangars, and aircraft, a forward operating miracle in the middle of the Pacific. The first operational mission from Iwo Jima's new airfields came at dawn on June 7, 1945. WW2’s. Sun rose red through the haze of sulfur and jet exhaust. Lined up on the black runway of Motoyama No. 2 were P-51 Mustangs of the 21st Fighter Group, their silver wings glinting in the dawn. Their task: escort the B-29s on a 1,000-mile strike toward Tokyo. Major James Tapp, leader of the 78th Fighter Squadron, taxied to position and gave a simple radio call. "Volcano Tower, this is Mustang lead. We're taking off." With a thunderous roar, his Mustang lifted off. The first Allied combat aircraft ever to fly from an airfield carved inside a volcano. Behind him, dozens more followed, disappearing into the morning haze toward Japan. From that day forward, Iwo Jima became the lifeline of the Pacific Air War. Before its capture, thousands of B-29s operating from the Mariana Islands had to fly over 3,000 kilometers of open ocean to reach Japan. A journey that left them vulnerable to weather, fuel exhaustion, and damage. With Iwo Jima secured, fighters could now escort bombers all the way to Tokyo. And more crucially, crippled bombers could land there on the way home. It wasn't long before that lifeline began saving lives. In the months following its completion, more than 2,400 B-29s made emergency landings on Iwo Jima's runways. Many arrived shot full of holes, engines trailing smoke, wheels half extended. Crews who had expected to die over the sea now found black volcanic ground beneath their wings. Solid, safe, and waiting. One pilot later recalled, "When I saw Iwo through the clouds, it looked like hell, but to us, it was heaven." The airfields also became launching points for photo reconnaissance missions and fighter sweeps over Japan, helping the Allies map out defenses and bomb damage in preparation for the final invasion plans. Operation Downfall. Meanwhile, the Japanese command was in disbelief. Their own reconnaissance planes, few and far between by mid-1945, had reported the island's fall, but not its rebirth. When the first waves of P-51s began appearing over Japan from an unknown direction, Imperial Army intelligence initially believed they were carrier-based aircraft. It took weeks before Tokyo realized the truth. The Americans were flying from a volcano. By July, the two completed runways on Iwo Jima were handling more than 200 aircraft movements a day. Fighters, bombers, transports, and medical evacuation planes. What had been a 4,000-man garrison at the start of the war now hosted over 15,000 Allied personnel, with fuel dumps, repair depots, radar stations, and tent cities built into the Black Slopes. The island that once symbolized Japan's forward defense had become America's spear point. Even nature seemed to acknowledge the irony. On July 11, 1945, a minor volcanic tremor shook the island, the first since the invasion. Engineers halted operations for several hours, uncertain whether the ground itself would erupt again. It didn't. The tremor passed like a sigh, as if the mountain had surrendered at last. Then came August 1945. When the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Iwo Jima was already hosting flights of B-29s, carrying the weapons components and escort planes on standby. Some of the aircraft on those missions took off from Motoyama No. 2. The volcano that had once spewed fire now launched the planes that would end the most devastating war in history. And still, it kept saving lives. After the atomic missions, hundreds more bombers diverted to Iwo Jima with battle damage or fuel leaks. In 1 month alone, over 500 B-29 crews were rescued from certain death by those black runways. By war's end, the U.S. Army Air Forces estimated that 27,000 airmen had been spared because of Iwo Jima's airfields, more than the number of Americans who had died capturing the island. The irony was both haunting and poetic. Every life lost in the battle had saved another in the air. On September 13, 1945, as Japan signed its surrender aboard the USS Missouri, aircraft from Iwo Jima flew overhead. The final operational link between war and peace, the volcanic airfield, built on suffering and determination, had fulfilled its purpose. The engineers dismantled temporary camps. The fighters departed. The island grew quiet once more. But the black scars of the runways remained, straight lines of human will carved across an ancient volcano. They stood as proof that even in the most hostile place on Earth, the machinery of war could build something that preserved life. When the guns finally fell silent, Iwo Jima's airfields were among the busiest in the Pacific. From March to August 1945, more than 73,000 B-29 sorties had been launched or supported from the Marianas, and nearly every one of them owed part of its success to the volcanic runways of Iwo Jima. Between March and September alone, over 2,400 emergency landings took place on the island. The numbers told a story that no speech could match. Tens of thousands of men who would never have returned from Japan instead stepped out of shattered bombers, kissed the black ground, and lived. The engineers who built those runways had achieved what military planners once thought impossible: a functioning tri-runway complex carved into solid lava, operational within 3 months of capture. According to the official U.S. Army Air Forces report, dated September 1945, the Iwo Jima fields increased bomber survival rates by 15% and improved bombing accuracy by allowing extended fighter coverage up to Tokyo and Yokohama. In simple terms, every bomber that flew with P-51 escort from Iwo Jima had a far higher chance of coming home. Major General Curtis LeMay, architect of the B-29 campaign, later wrote in his after-action brief, "Without Iwo Jima, our air offensive could not have been sustained. It was not merely a base, it was an anchor in the Pacific. But the cost was staggering. The Battle of Iwo Jima, lasting from February 19th to March 26, 1945, had claimed the lives of 6,821 American servicemen and wounded over 19,000 more. Virtually all 21,000 Japanese defenders perished. To the public, the island was immortalized by Joe Rosenthal's photograph of Marines raising the flag atop Mount Suribachi. Yet, to the airmen, Iwo Jima was remembered for something quieter: the miracle of black runways that meant survival. Each successful landing became a story of its own. A B-29, nicknamed City of Los Angeles, limped back from a Tokyo raid on May 27th, 2 engines dead and the 3rd sputtering. The crew sighted Iwo Jima through rain and smoke, crash-landed, and walked away unhurt. The co-pilot later wrote in his diary, "Iwo Jima wasn't just a rock. It was a promise that if we made it that far, we'd make it home." Across the Pacific, maintenance crews began painting the island's name on their aircraft as a talisman: Iwo, short for "I'll work out." The airfield's daily operations statistics were staggering for an island barely 5 miles long. By mid-July 1945, Motoyama No. 1 and No. 2 handled an average of 180 aircraft movements a day, including escort fighters, bomber diversions, reconnaissance planes, and search and rescue craft. Aviation fuel consumption exceeded 100,000 gallons daily, supplied by a network of tankers, pipelines, and underground storage carved into the volcanic rock. Reports from the 7th Fighter Command noted that fighter escort missions from Iwo Jima increased B-29 bombing accuracy from 26% to nearly 40%, largely due to decreased harassment by enemy interceptors. For the first time in the air war over Japan, U.S. bombers could operate under near-total air superiority. But even as the data confirmed the airfield's success, the men who built and maintained it began to leave. The Seabees of the 133rd Naval Construction Battalion, those who had cut, blasted, and poured their way through volcanic rock, packed up their bulldozers and generators. In their final report, one officer simply wrote, "We built on lava and made it live." The Navy's Pacific Command summarized the achievement in a single line that would later appear in engineering manuals. The airfields of Iwo Jima represented the most remarkable rapid construction on hostile terrain in modern military history. And yet, for all the statistics, the story of Iwo Jima's airfields remained partly invisible, overshadowed by the famous battle that preceded them. To the pilots of the Pacific, however, that island was never just a battleground. It was a second chance, carved by human hands from fire and stone. When peace finally settled over the Pacific, Iwo Jima's volcanic airfields stood as silent monuments to the intersection of technology, willpower, and sacrifice. Yet even in victory, their story carried deeper lessons, both practical and philosophical. Scene: in the immediate post-war years, the runways remained active, serving as staging points for occupation forces and repatriation flights. Thousands of prisoners of war, diplomats, and relief personnel passed through the island on their way to Japan or homeward to the United States. The same craters that once shook with artillery now echoed with the drone of transport planes and the steady rhythm of peace. But for military engineers, Iwo Jima became something more. A case study in what could be accomplished when traditional limits were ignored. Reports compiled by the U.S. Navy Bureau of Yards and Docks turned the project into doctrine. They dissected how the Seabees used lava dust as aggregate, how they stabilized porous volcanic soil with crushed coral and fuel oil, how runway drainage systems had been carved straight through cooled magma. These innovations would later shape Cold War airbase construction across the globe. On islands like Wake, Kwajalein, and Guam, and later in the Arctic and Atlantic outposts of NATO, the Iwo method, rapid, layered runway reinforcement on unstable or frozen ground, became a standard engineering reference. What was born from necessity amid war became a peacetime science of logistics and survival, even. The Soviets studied the feat. Declassified. U.S. Air Force intelligence files from the early 1950s show that Soviet military engineers analyzed Iwo Jima's construction during their own buildup of Pacific air bases in the Kuril Islands. To them, the project demonstrated not just American power, but adaptability, the ability to turn geography itself into a weapon. Yet Iwo Jima's legend also entered myth. To the public, it was remembered as the island where the flag was raised, not where thousands of lives were quietly saved. The runways, Motoyama No. 1, 2, and 3, were rarely mentioned in Hollywood's portrayals of the war. Even official commemorations focused more on the battle than the engineering miracle that followed it. Still, among veterans and aviators, the truth endured. The U.S. Army Air Forces estimated that 27,000 airmen's lives had been preserved thanks to the emergency landings made possible by Iwo Jima's fields. For those men, the island was more than a symbol. It was the difference between disappearance and return. By the late 1950s, the airfields fell into disuse as jet aircraft and refueling technology rendered them obsolete. The volcanic dust began to reclaim the concrete. Winds carved back the edges of the runways. The sea air corroded the hangars. Nature began to take back the black rock from which men had carved history. But the legacy lived on. in textbooks, in engineering manuals, and in the quiet pride of the Seabees who had been there. Many would later go on to lead civil projects across the world, building airports, highways, and dams, always remembering that if a runway could rise from volcanic ash under fire, then anything could be built anywhere. In one of his post-war lectures, Admiral Ben Moriel, founder of the Seabees, said, "On Iwo Jima, we learned that no terrain is impossible, only unattempted." And that idea, born in the furnace of a Pacific volcano, would define military engineering for generations. Still, one truth lingered beyond statistics and heroism: the cost of turning Earth into war's instrument. The airfield that saved thousands had also been won at Iwo, the price of thousands more. The island of fire had given men a runway, but demanded a graveyard in return. And from that contradiction came the enduring lesson that victory, like the volcano itself, always burns beneath the surface. In the end, the airfield inside the volcano stood as more than a feat of engineering. It was a mirror of humanity's contradictions. Built in the name of survival, it emerged from destruction. Created to preserve life, it rested upon the ashes of thousands who would never see it completed. The men who carved Iwo Jima's runways from molten rock were not builders of monuments, but problem solvers. They turned lava into foundation, ash into pavement, and despair into function. Their work did not shine or roar, it simply endured. It represented what war always demands, but rarely celebrates: silent competence. In those months of 1945, amid the Pacific's fury, technology and human will met at their most raw. Bulldozers crawled where men once fought, hammers replaced rifles, and the battlefield transformed into infrastructure. It was proof that even in war's darkest theater, the instinct to build, to create order from ruin, never disappears. Yet Iwo Jima's story remains haunted by balance. For every life the airfield saved, another had been taken to claim the ground they stood on. The engineers' triumph could not erase the Marines' blood that hardened beneath the asphalt. Progress had risen, literally, from the crater of sacrifice. And perhaps that is the lasting lesson of Iwo Jima, that ingenuity, in war, is never pure. Every innovation carries a shadow. Every miracle of logistics has a cost written in names and numbers we seldom see. Today, satellite images show the island quiet again. Black rock, silent runways, the sea whispering against its edges. But the idea forged there endures. The belief that no place is too remote, no terrain too harsh, no challenge too great, if necessity demands it. Because on a desolate volcano in the middle of the Pacific, humanity proved that even inside the Earth's fire, it could build a runway to the sky. Germany never knew that inside a volcano, the Allies had built not just an airfield, but a testament to what desperation and determination can create when survival takes flight.